session today is on some cultural points that, Talita already mentioned, both kind of that are related to potentially, professional life in Ireland and also social life. And in Ireland, we're kind of a relationship-based culture mostly. So relationships in general are quite important to us. So social and professional elements can cross over a little bit as well. So even some of the social elements here can be relevant for, the workplace in Ireland also. And as Talita said, if you have any questions at any time, you can either put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask. So a quick introduction to myself. My name is Bridget, as you can see, and I run a business called AllTalk Training, and our business is really around helping people to understand cultural elements about Ireland, but also culture, helping multicultural teams work more easily with each other, and also to communicate more easily with each other in English. And so today's session, of course, is in collaboration with the Open Doors Initiative and Pathways to Progress. So thank you very much to Lita for having us. Okay, so let's get into, I suppose, really kind of the first introduction to Ireland is really, well, tell me a little bit more about Ireland itself. Sometimes people might not learn some things that are kind of important to know about Ireland as a country itself until, they're here for some time. So, maybe you know some of these little details already, but if not, I think these are important things to know. So first of all, the island of Ireland is in fact two different countries, or it's made up of two different countries. So the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom. So you can see on the map the difference, the border here, so to speak. Um, there's 32 counties on the island in total. 26 of those counties are in the Republic of Ireland, and 6 counties are in Northern Ireland. So often when people say, that they're from Ireland, they might really be referring to the Republic of Ireland, but they may also be referring to Northern Ireland. So if you're filling out a form, for example, and it asks you in which country are you living or are you based, in the drop down menu, usually if you're living in the Republic of Ireland, then you'll see an option for the Republic of Ireland. If you're living in Northern Ireland, you may see Northern Ireland in the list, but you may only have the option to choose the UK. So there's just that difference there. So while we often just use Ireland, you may have to be sometimes more precise about, is it Republic of Ireland or Northern Ireland? And just a side note here is that, you can see all the counties here. So we've Mayo, Dublin, Cork, Tipperary. I'm from Tipperary, for example. They are all the counties, as I've mentioned. And just a side note is that county is spelled like this, but very often we write it with just C, O, and a dot to show that it is abbreviated for county. So and the other little thing about this is many people in Ireland will identify with their county when they say where they're from. So if you say to somebody, where are you from? Usually people will answer with the county that they're from. I'm from Cork, I'm from Dublin, I'm from Limerick, I'm from Offaly, whatever the county is. So the county is a very it's a strong part of people's identity quite often. And that might be linked to some Irish sports, because when we play Irish sports, it's one county versus another county usually. So that probably is quite linked to that. I'll come to some Irish sports towards the end of the session. So, for example, a conversation might be, "Where are you from?" If somebody asks me that, I'd say I'm from Tipperary or County Tipperary. And very often the follow-up question to that is whereabouts, which means where more precisely or where exactly in Tipperary. So I could say Tipperary town. Now, I'm not from Tipperary town myself, but for example, it could be Tipperary town. Cashel is another quite well-known town in County Tipperary. So, so for example, if someone asks you where you're from, you might have another answer, or you might also say the county where you're living. Or if people ask you where are you living, you could say the county, and then just be prepared for a potential follow-up question of whereabouts, and then you can tell them what town, what village, what city you're in that county. Now, I've mentioned town and village and city. So people often use the word city in English more than we would actually use the word city ourselves. So in Ireland, just be careful because there are actually only six cities in Ireland. And the six cities are Dublin, Galway, Limerick, Kilkenny, Waterford, and Cork. Anything that is smaller than these six cities is either a town or a village. So across Ireland, there are many, many towns. There are not that many cities. As you can see, there's only six, and also there are many villages. So be careful when you're using that word city. Is it really a city that you're referring to, or is it what we would call a town? So just be careful with those two words. And then also, what can be confusing for people sometimes is, for example, in County Tipperary, there is a town called Tipperary Town. But there's also lots of other towns that don't have the name Tipperary in it. Or, for example, in Cork, there's the county of Cork, but then there's also Cork City. And the same with Limerick, Limerick City. So often you have a county that can contain a town or a city with the same name in the city name. Okay, so let's move on to some greetings or what's unusual maybe or what is particular about greetings in Ireland. And one of the things that confuses people when they come to Ireland the most is a funny thing that we do with greetings where, for example, if I meet somebody on the street, like you see in the picture here, and we're walking past each other, what is a very common greeting is, hello, how are you? Which is a question, but the response very often is simply how are you or hello how are you back, and but neither person really answers the question how are you. It's just part of hello. It's like an extended version of the greeting hello. So instead of these two people just saying hello hello and then continuing to walk past each other, the greeting very often in Ireland can be hello how are you, and then they continue to walk past each other. So if you are confused because people are saying hello how are you to you all the time and not waiting for a response, just know that really it's not really intended as a question in this context. Now, if you meet colleagues in the workplace, for example, or if you're not just walking past somebody that you know on the street, but you're actually, meeting someone, um, let's say at work, they might say, hello, how are you? And not expect a response, but then they might start a conversation with you. And if you get to know them more, they might then also in the conversation ask you again later in the conversation, how are you? And at that time, it's not the greeting, it's a genuine question of, I want to know how you are. So, so sometimes how are you might be just a greeting. Sometimes it might be the genuine question, tell me how you are doing. So, um, but how are you? Hello, how are you is also a very kind of clear way of saying it. It might also be, how you, or how's it going, or how you doing. So there's lots of informal ways to say as well, hello, how are you. So this response, for example, is quite an informal response, but very common response to hello, how are you. So how are you, which is the short version, so to speak. Very informal, but very common. And then when it comes to maybe again, the greeting, sitting down when for example, if you go to an interview or something like that, the likely greeting is also going to be, hi, how are you? And what's very common in Ireland is that if someone asks, hello, how are you? And you do respond with an answer that is not just, how are you? And you actually answer the question, it's very unusual for Irish people to be honest here. So, and it's just seen as a greeting again, but an extended greeting. So, for example, a typical response from an Irish person to this question would be, good, thanks, how are you? And it's kind of automatic. So, even if I'm having a terrible day and, really everything could be better for me at the moment, if somebody says, how are you? I will very likely respond dishonestly and say, I'm good, thanks, how are you? because the cultural understanding of this situation is not really that I need to know how you are doing. It's just a formality. It's just a way to start an interaction. How are you? I'm good, thanks. How are you? I'm fine, thanks. How are you? Or in Ireland, often people say, I'm grand, thanks. How are you? And there's no need to really say anything more. You could also have this situation, how are you or how's it going? And the person responds with grand thanks, and they don't even ask the other person how they are, because we've just already, we've just gone through the process of this formality, this little greeting that we do with each other, that we don't really want to know how each other really is. We just do it because it's a kind of a cultural norm. And then we get into we get down to business, for example. We start talking about work or whatever it is that we are talking about. So this again might be kind of strange for some people if they come from a culture, or if you come from a culture where if somebody asks you how you are, you usually respond with, you know what, I'm not too good today. I didn't sleep last night and I'm really tired and da 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 da. And if you do that with an Irish person, and they're not expecting it and they hear some negative information, it might really surprise them and think, oh, that was strange. I don't expect that. And it might give a, a negative impression, because again, that's just not what they're expecting, because the cultural norm is, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. How are you? And then you move on to talk about, what the real conversation is about, whether it's work related or whatever. So it's good to answer here with a kind of a, I suppose, a positive or at least kind of a neutral response. So grand thanks. This word grand is not used in all countries where English is spoken, at least not in the same way as it is used in Ireland. So grand is a really common word in Ireland, and it's very common for people to answer this question, how are you, with grand thanks. But sometimes what's interesting about grand is that depending on how people use, depending on the intonation when people say grand thanks, you will have maybe an idea of how they really are feeling. So if someone says, oh, I'm grand thanks, then actually they're probably really good. Whereas if they answer with, oh, grand thanks, it might mean that, there's some, you know, things are not so good. So there's a lot of kind of underlying information or needing to read between the lines sometimes. Because if an Irish person is used to saying positive things all the time in response to this question, because that's what's culturally, kind of normal, then sometimes if things are not so good, maybe from the intonation you can detect when things are not as good as the person is actually saying. I hope that makes sense to you. And I'm sure over time you will hear the different ways people answer the question, hi, how are you? And also maybe the different ways they respond using the word grand. And sometimes maybe with like positive intonation, and sometimes maybe with lower intonation, which might, indicate that something is not good. So in general in Ireland, we are not very uh, direct about, lots of things. And we'll come to that more in a few minutes as well. So, just kind of on the topic of greetings, a little word about physical greetings. In a professional context, it is common to shake someone's hand the first time you meet a person. So, if you go to an interview, for example, it would be common for the people interviewing to extend their hand or to put out their hand to shake your hand in greeting you. But if you meet them again, maybe if it's another interview, if it's a second interview, it would be, it's a little bit more formal context. So probably people would, put their hand out again to shake your hand. But when you start working in a workplace, you've kind of met the person, you know them now. So we don't usually go into a workplace every day and every day we shake the hands of our colleagues, which, they might do in some cultures. In Ireland, we don't really do that. So it's usually for, the first time we meet somebody, or if we meet someone in kind of a business context or in a formal professional context, such as an interview. Um, And usually we do not shake hands after the first time we meet someone then. But, it depends on the situation, it depends on the people. And then in a social context, people may or may not shake hands when they meet someone for the first time. So in the professional context, it's more likely that people will put out their hand to shake your hand when they meet you. In a social context, it really depends on the person. Some people are not really comfortable with shaking people's hands, so they might just say hello and not do anything. They might say, "Oh, hi," and maybe wave. But some people in a social context will do the same as they would in a professional context the first time they meet someone and put their hand out to shake your hand. Um, if you're not sure what to do, don't panic. You can wait to see if someone, the person that you're meeting, extends their hand to you first. And, you will know then if obviously if they put their hand out for you, then you will know that it's appropriate here to shake their hand. Um, if you're from a culture where you're really not used to shaking people's hands and that's something that's really really uncomfortable for you, if you're happy to do it even though you're uncomfortable or it's strange for you, then do it. But if you're really really not happy to do it, don't be afraid to let the person know that, I would say a smile on your face, just say thank you very much, I appreciate the gesture, but if you don't mind, I'm not comfortable shaking your hand. And usually people will understand quickly that it's just a cultural difference and that's okay. So don't be afraid just because it's the thing to do in Ireland in some situations, that therefore you have to do it. If it's something that's very difficult for you or very uncomfortable for you, don't be afraid to say it to whoever it is that you are meeting. What about any other physical greetings? We're not very touchy-feely in Ireland. We don't have physical contact with people that, who are not really close to us in general. But of course, that can vary from person to person. So in the workplace, generally, a handshake is about as close as we get to people. But again, there may be some workplaces or some colleagues, or some teams where that's different, where they might sometimes greet each other with a hug. Obviously among friends, I see, like I'm a huggy person. I like hugging people. So with my friends, I would always hug them, maybe kiss them on the cheek. But I also know some people who would never do that, even to really, really close friends. So I would say in general in Ireland, physical greetings are very personal. It varies a lot from person to person. So a hug maybe normal, or maybe normal for some person, but also maybe not. And then a kiss is also, again, some people might do it, some not, but there's no standard like two kisses on the cheek for everybody or two kisses on the cheek for friends, but not for colleagues. There's no rules like that. So it's really about what a person is comfortable with. And generally, people don't hug or kiss too much, let's say, when they're greeting. Even certainly in the workplace, it's very, very uncommon, but even among friends, it can vary a lot. Okay, so if there's any questions, so far or whatever, you can, like I said, share in the chat or you can unmute yourselves. Um, but I continue, and Talita, either you can interrupt me if there's questions, or if someone wants to unmute themselves, that's fine too. So we'll move on to another topic, which is, again, very much kind of important for the professional context, but also for, the social context in Ireland. And that is the topic of small talk. So what is small talk? So many cultures engage regularly in small talk, but there's many cultures that don't engage in small talk, almost never. So if you're from a culture that engages in small talk, then you'll know exactly what we're talking about. But if you're not from a culture where you don't usually engage in small talk, then the concept might be a little bit unusual. So small talk really is the um light topics of conversation. So, not serious topics, usually not serious topics of conversation that people might have with each other when either, they don't really know each other so well yet. Maybe they meet at, a social event at work, for example, or, a social event in your personal time, in your free time. Um, so when you don't really know somebody, you might engage in small talk. So, for example, in Ireland, you might talk about the weather, which is a very common topic for small talk in Ireland. Um, or it might be that with people that you already know, but before for example, maybe you have a meeting with a colleague, and in Ireland, if two colleagues meet and they need to talk about something to do with work, usually they will first have a little bit of small talk first. So they'll talk about the weather and some other topics, and then they will get into the topic, the reason why they are having a meeting. And that's very important because if you remember at the beginning of the session, I said that in Ireland we're quite a relationship based culture, and small talk is part of that. I'm not just talking to you because we need to collaborate on something. I'm also, I'm concerned, or, I find our relationship important, and therefore I don't want to just start talking about work. I'm happy to have some little conversation with you about how you are in general, some other kind of topics. So, what are acceptable small talk subjects? So, even if you're from a culture that does engage in small talk as well, and small talk is important, just be careful because maybe the topics or the subjects that are suitable for small talk in your culture and in the Irish culture, they might be a little bit different. And sometimes, if the topics are different and you start a small talk conversation with a topic that's not considered suitable in Ireland, then you might without meaning to, you could offend, or maybe just give somebody a negative impression, which of course you don't want to. So it's very important in Ireland, and it's really for I suppose starting to build those relationships. So here there's a list of some topics or subjects for small talk. And four of them are not okay in general for a discussion or a small talk discussion in Ireland. So maybe just have a look at them and see which ones, or just think about which ones you think might be not okay. So we've personal relationships, the weather. I've already mentioned that that's a very good topic. So, that's a good topic in Ireland. Politics, the traffic, for example, or something about, the area that you're living, or maybe, whatever it might be, somewhere being busy, um, sports, something interesting where you are. So, for example, these people at an event, and obviously they've got some drinks, and maybe the drinks are, the selection of drinks are very nice. So, if they meet someone that they don't really know, but they want to start a conversation, they could say, "Aren't isn't the selection of drinks very nice here?" So it could be something that is specific to the situation that you're in. Or if you're at a party, you could say to someone that, "Oh, the music is great, isn't it?" Or "The music is terrible, isn't it?" Whichever, however it is that you feel about the music. Other things would be light news items, your weekend, religion, and personal appearance. So four of these are kind of off the menu, so to speak, for Ireland. And so they would be politics, personal relationships if you don't know the person. So that would be something that we wouldn't really ask somebody about. Religion and personal appearance. So politics and religion can often be topics that are not really spoken about in small talk in many cultures. Personal appearance is not really something that would people would comment on either. And personal relationships. So sometimes people from other cultures, if I'm engaging in small talk with them, they might say, "How's your family? How's your mother and your father? Are you married? Do you have kids?" Things like that. And they are considered very personal questions in Ireland. So generally, you wouldn't ask people questions like that until Either they mention something themselves. So if a colleague, for example, in your workplace says something like, oh, at the weekend, which is a fine topic to talk about, I went to the zoo with my kids, with my children. If they have mentioned their children, then it's okay for you to ask a follow-up question like, oh, you have children. How many children do you have? Because they have shared that personal information with you. But if they have not done that, then it wouldn't be really considered polite to, meet somebody, you don't know them very well yet, and then just outright ask them, are you married? Do you have children? Where do you live? All that kind of like personal information. But everything else here, so the weather, light news items. When I say light news items, I mean, something in the news that's not political or something like that. Your weekend in the workplace, for example, after you have if you're working Monday to Friday, for example, and then you are working or you're off at the weekend on Monday, a very common small talk conversation with colleagues would be, how was your weekend? Or did you have a good weekend? Um, so yeah, so these things are all on the table or on the menu, that you can choose from if you would like to engage in small talk. So maybe here this guy could be saying to the group, the weather is terrible, isn't it? That's an acceptable small talk topic. Now, actually, the weather looks actually decent enough outside there if you look out the window. So maybe it could be, the weather is great, isn't it? Or again, it could be something about the event that they're at, the drink selection is great, whatever it is. So then just to get on the topic of being polite in Ireland, and this is something that quite often there's a mismatch with people coming from other cultures and come to Ireland, that very often the perception of different ways of communicating among people from other cultures can be that the perception is that sometimes people are impolite. Of course, people generally don't mean to be impolite, but there's a difference in how maybe people communicate, and then that can seem impolite, so not polite. So how do you be polite in Ireland? Like, what is politeness? What does it look like? What does it sound like? So in Ireland, for example, we usually address people by their first names. So my name is Bridget Farrell. Nobody calls me Miss Farrell. Nobody, 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 nobody in business, nobody at work, nobody I meet in on the street, randomly, and they ask my name. Everybody calls me Bridget or refers to me as Bridget. And it might be only in very formal situations. Um, for example, maybe if I'm dealing with a government organization, they may use Miss Farrell, but they probably will use Bridget. Or maybe if I'm waiting in the doctor's surgery to be seen by the doctor, they may call me Miss Farrell, but very likely they'll call me Bridget. So this use of the first name in Ireland is really common, and even in kind of formal situations, it's still quite common. Which means we don't really use Miss Farrell or that way of referring to somebody as a way to show respect and be polite. And also in English, there's no formal word for you, which in many languages there's an informal word for you, and then there's a formal word for you. And that helps to show respect and politeness. Again, in English, we don't have that. So these are kind of two ways that some languages and cultures might use to show politeness that we don't really use in Ireland, or we can't because we don't have a formal you. So therefore, we find other ways to show politeness and respect. And one of the biggest ways that we show politeness is how we communicate, how we make a sentence in comparison to how some other cultures might do it. So generally that means that we are mostly very indirect in how we communicate. And that indirect communication style that we use is important in order to be polite. So if I show you some kind of what we would consider direct ways of communicating, and which would be considered impolite in Ireland, and people wouldn't use so much, or they would certainly use the indirect version more often, and then you'll see the indirect version to compare it. So if I'm at work and if I'm late for work every day, it's unlikely that my manager will say that you're late for work or you are late to work every day. It's more likely that they will say, sometimes you're not on time or you're not always on time. Can you please come on time from now on, for example? So our way of communicating is very, very indirect. So this is specifically around the idea of sharing negative information or negative feedback. If somebody said, if somebody sees, you've shared your opinion about some option to do something in a different way, and the person thinks, God, that's the worst option, they would certainly not say that's the worst option. They're much more likely to say, I'm not sure it's the best option. So that's a very indirect way to say that is not a good option, or it's a bad option, or it's the worst option. So if you're used to communicating in this kind of way, be very, very careful in Ireland, because that can be perceived as really impolite and unprofessional. So you might have to learn to communicate in a more indirect way, but also you might have to learn to how to interpret this kind of sentence. So if you hear, I'm not sure it's the best option, really what you should understand in the Irish context is that that means they do not like the option that I suggested. That it means something stronger than it might actually seem from the language that is used. Again, that's a bad idea. An Irish person is more likely to say that might not be the best idea, or that isn't the best idea. So again, we use a lot of language to kind of soften, to not make it to make it more indirect. So all the kind of little techniques, or the language that we use to kind of maybe soften or to make something less direct is in bold here. So you might get some ideas what you can do. You shouldn't do that. It sounds very strong and direct. Might be better to say perhaps you could do it differently. So again, first of all, it's good to learn how you can communicate in that way, but also it's good to know that if someone says this to you, that you can interpret the real meaning, which is probably stronger, like, not just perhaps you could do it differently, but I should do it differently. Your performance is not good enough. That should read, apologies, that's a mistake. Your performance is not good enough. Um, it's more likely that someone will say your performance is not always as good as it can be. So again, that is even softened quite a lot there. So it could be maybe you come from a culture where it's more likely that you communicate in this style as well, and so therefore it will be probably quite easy for you to do it and to continue the same way. But if you come from a culture where it's not unusual for people to communicate regularly with this kind of direct language, then it will be very important for you to take some of these ideas and use them and learn how to use them. If we so in one context it's giving negative information, in another it could be making requests. So when you request something from somebody, um, that is also an area where Irish people tend to use a lot of indirect language. So where in a direct communication style, someone might say, "Open the window, please," and it's considered completely normal and polite. Whereas if I heard that, I would think, "Whew, that's a very direct way to ask me to open the window." So I might say, "Would you mind opening the window?" And I might add, "Please," also. "Would you mind opening the window?" or "Would you mind opening the window, please?" Please send me the report ASAP or ASAP. Again, it's quite direct. An Irish person might be more likely to write or say, it would be great if you could send me the report as soon as you can. So it's like expressions like, would you mind? It would be great if you could. They're very important in our communication. Can you support me on this project? It might be better to say, would it be possible for you to support me on this project, for example? Now, it doesn't mean that we never use requests or make requests in this kind of little bit more direct way. But depending on the relationship and how comfortable someone is with somebody, or how many requests someone makes of one person, people might use this kind of request, or maybe, could you support me, or would you mind? But we're more likely to revert to using would you mind, would it be possible, it would be great if you could. So we're more likely to do it that way. The last one here is, please let me know the details of the project. It's, again, depends on the relationship. It could be okay, but again, we're more likely to use something like, would you mind sharing the details of the project? Or a little bit more formal, I'd really appreciate it if you could share the details of the project with me. So again, this kind of language is generally very, very important in Ireland. Okay, so we get on to define a little bit. So we're just going to have a quick look at Ireland and the Irish language. So you will see the Irish language everywhere. So there is an Irish language, first of all. So, in Ireland, we speak English generally, but also there is an Irish language that is totally different to English. Sometimes people think, oh, well, they must be similar, but they're very, very different. They have different language roots and everything. So on signs in Ireland, for example, which I'm sure you've probably seen already, you'll always have the English name, and then you'll have also the Irish name of the place on the sign as well. In some parts of Ireland, Irish is more, the Irish language is stronger. It's spoken by more people. They're usually quite small pockets, small parts in the country. And sometimes in those parts of the country, you might not have the English on the sign at all. You might only have the Irish name for the place on the sign. And even on signs that are not just about the names of places, but also kind of instructions or warnings on the road, you will have it in English and then also in Irish. Less than 2% of Irish people speak Irish as their first language, so it's very, very low. But everybody, more or less, learns it in school. So people would have knowledge of the language, but they might not speak it very fluently, or some of them might speak it fluently, but they're not native speakers. So there's only 2% of Irish people that speak it as their first language. So it's quite small. Only about 50% of people can speak it well. However, some Irish words are used frequently as part of daily language. So when I'm speaking English, sometimes I'll use an Irish word because I know everybody else uses it, and so some words would be used in English, but they come from the Irish language. So some of those, oh, sorry, before we go on to that, Irish names or place names can be difficult to pronounce in general. So that's the names of people, for example, that you may meet in your daily life here, or it might be the names of places, even where you live could be difficult, for example. So don't be afraid to ask how to pronounce someone's name or the name of a place. It can be even difficult sometimes if I go to different parts of the country that I'm not familiar with. It might be difficult for me to get the pronunciation of the name because it's not obvious just from the spelling. So people might pronounce it differently to how, I think is pronounced. So don't be afraid to ask if you feel you need to. So could you tell me how to pronounce your name, for example, or your place name, or the place name correctly? So some of the words that we use in the from Irish that are often used in English when we're speaking English in Ireland, or maybe that you might often see on signs around. One of them is fáilte, so you see that quite often, which means welcome. Sláinte, which is very important in the social context. If you're having a drink together, usually it's an alcoholic drink, but you can also do it with any drink, right? So if you're just with friends or with people, and instead of saying cheers, which is the English version, many people will say sláinte. So they have two drinks and they click the drinks and they say sláinte. Another one is go raibh maith agat, which means thank you. So go raibh maith agat. You might see it somewhere. Slán, which is goodbye, slán. And then very often the Irish language is referred to as Gaeilge. So it's not Gaelic, which a lot of people say, but usually if we use the Irish word for the Irish language, we will refer to it as Gaeilge. And sometimes you might see old signs like this, for example, and the signs are in Irish. This particular one means library. So it's obviously on an old library and they haven't changed the sign. So you might see it around like that. And finally, ERA, which is Ireland. And you often see this on Irish stamps, for example. So stamps that you buy at the post office, you might see ERA, and ERA is the Irish name for Ireland. And finally, on the Irish language, then the most important word probably to know is the word crack, and it's spelled like this, but it's pronounced like the English word crack. And it's probably the most important word to know because it's the most used Irish word in English. So when we're speaking English, we use this word a lot in Ireland, and it can have lots of different meanings. You can't really translate it directly into English. There's no real English equivalent, but depending on the context, it can mean, fun, good times, having fun together with people. So, for example, you could say the party was great crack, which means the party was lots of fun. Or we could say we had great crack at the weekend, which means we had a lot of fun. But we also use it in the context of what's the crack, which means, which is, what's the story, what's up, would be English equivalents. Or, but really we can say, I can meet Talita and I say, oh, hi, Talita, what's the crack? Which is kind of like, how are you? It's the similar kind of greeting to what we looked at earlier. So that's a common question. Or any crack, which means any news or what's happening, what's up, what's going on, all of those. So Talita, I'm just conscious of the time. I have one last little thing to look at. Is it okay if I continue with it?
Yeah, of course. I do have a
Okay.
question though. Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Please.
So, if someone would ask what's the crack, would you take the same approach of like saying what's the crack back? Would you answer that with like everything's okay? I never know how to
Yeah,
how to
great
deal with
question.
that one.
What's the crack? Or any crack, people say, oh, not much. So,
Yeah,
like, any crack is like, is there anything going on? Is there anything happening? So, the answer to that can be, oh, not much, everything's fine. Or, any crack, all is good. And again, it would be usually a positive or at least a neutral answer. So, it kind of has that, it's just part of the initial greeting. So, we don't get too serious, even if things are not so good. So it's kind of a positive or a neutral answer, like, oh, not much is happening, or not much crack, or, things are fine. And then maybe later you might get into further conversation and people might say, so is there really any crack at all? Or, really, how are you? Which is more, I'm looking now for your genuine answer, so to speak. So, but the initial, like, any crack, oh, not much, no, all is good. Oh, yeah, loads of crack, which is if you have like great news, for example. So those would be kind of the standard answers, I would say.
got it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
lovely. Good. Okay. So the last thing on the language is that, sometimes so we speak English mostly in Ireland, but the Irish language influences, some of the words that we use as well, like crack, for example. But there's also some ways that we use English words that are uniquely Irish. So we use them in a unique way that they don't do in other countries where they speak English as a first language. So for example, the word to mess means to joke, like I'm just messing, and that's not uh, maybe someone from the UK, for example, if I'm speaking with them and I say, "Oh, I'm just messing," they might not really know what I mean. Or grand, we already spoke about that one. In Ireland, we use it in a unique way, and is used to say fine, okay. And if the intonation is positive or high, then it can mean really good actually. So grand can have lots of meanings depending on the context and the intonation. Then also the word that's gas, which is that's funny, that's interesting, that's unusual. It's a very Irish word. No other English speakers use the word like this. So that's gas could be my response to um, you know, um like Talita asking, me, for example, any crack, and I say, well, this is how we can answer any crack, and then Talita could say, oh, that's gas, which is kind of that's interesting, or that's funny, that's unusual, that's strange. It has kind of again lots of meanings. It's hard to really get another English word that means exactly the same thing. So, but it's something that you probably will hear a lot in Ireland. Um, Wrecked can mean very tired, which they don't really use in other English speaking countries. And to give out is to complain, to give out about something. So that is directly a direct translation from the Irish language. And then I'm just after doing something, which is a whole grammatical construction that is unique to Ireland. And again, it comes from it's an influence from the Irish language. So if you've learned English, for example, you've probably learned the correct version, so to speak, or at least the not Irish English version, which is I've just done something. But in Ireland, very often for this grammatical construction, have just done, we would often say, I'm just after doing something. So if you hear people using this, you can kind of think to yourself, oh, I know what they're saying is really like, I've just done it. So I'm just after finishing the book. I have just finished the book. So that's the grammatical thing there. And finally, so the last topic is I promised you that I'd come back to sport in a little bit. Sport is a topic, if you're, I suppose the thing that's nice to know about sport is that sport is something that across cultures people can bond on quite well, that they can talk about quite well. There's World Cups and everything like that. So in Ireland, sport is really important, I would say. Soccer would be quite common, rugby, horse racing, tennis, golf. So there's lots of different sports that would be quite important culturally in Ireland. But what's very important for you to know, because you possibly know most of these sports already, but what is unique to Ireland is what we call Gaelic football. So it's not soccer, it's not American football, it's what we call Gaelic football. And that is a sport unique to Ireland. And then also hurling. It's hurling if it's a men's team that's playing it, and camogie for women's team. So, if you would like to know more about Irish sport or two sports that are unique to Ireland, I recommend going onto YouTube. And if you Google the title here, "The Best of Gaelic Football," you'll see, some images or some footage of the sport being played. And then if you Google "crazy hurling skills," you'll also find a video that, shows hurling, the sport in action. And I think it's important to know about these because culturally they're really important sports. And so, in when you are, meeting people from Ireland, it's likely that people will talk about these two sports. And the GAA is the Gaelic Athletic Association, and basically that's the organization that kind of, manages these sports, so to speak. So the GAA would be an important organization in Ireland. And again, it's something that you might hear people talking about. So it's nice to know about it. Okay, so that is the end of the presentation. I'm gone over a bit, Talita, so apologies for that. But thank you all for your time. I'm here for the next few minutes, so if you have any questions at all, please ask.
Anyone? You can use the chat if you are not comfortable unmuting yourself. Don't see anyone on the chat. I might bring something up that got me
Yes,
confused when I first started, when I first
lovely.
arrived. So the use
Yeah.
of your man or your woman when talking
I need to
about
add that
someone,
to the list. Oh my
it's a
God,
good
that's a
one.
very confusing thing. Okay, I have that in another course. I should add this. Oh God, how do you explain that? So sometimes, uh, sometimes Irish people can refer to another person as your man or your one, and your man refers to a man, and your one refers to a woman. So if someone is telling a story, for example, or I went into the shop, and your man who works there told me that they were sold out of milk, and so I couldn't get any milk. Or if it was a woman who was working in the shop on the day, I went to the shop to get milk. There was no milk. I asked your one behind the counter, the woman, your one working there, and she said that they were sold out of milk. So people can refer to other people, they don't know their name and things like that, as your man or your one. That's a very informal and very Irish way to refer to people. Yes.
And I
Good
was very
question.
confused in the
Yeah,
beginning,
I can
like,
imagine.
my man? What do you mean?
Yeah, exactly. And your man is always really your man or your man. People might say it like your man. And your one can also sound like your one. Your one. So your
Yeah,
one or your one. And I mean, people even spell it in all different ways because it doesn't exist in formal language, so to speak. So there's no real clarity on how you should spell that. So it's mostly used in spoken language.
that's great. Yeah, it's gonna
Yeah.
make everyone's life a little bit easier, that
Yeah,
piece of
good.
information.
Fantastic. Anything else, Talita, that you have experienced or you think would be useful for people to know?
We have someone on the chat here.
Okay.
So Tahira said, ask how formal or informal is the use of the word ye in Ireland? So why
It's
ye?
informal. Yeah, it's informal but very common. So, in general, I so people, for example, usually wouldn't use it in writing, and that's when you know that it's informal. So even if I might say it, if I might say it to you here, if I'm actually writing something to you, I'm more likely to use you because writing just feels like it should be a little bit more precise and a little bit more formal. um, but we do use it a lot. And again, that would be quite unique to Ireland. It's not that other English speaking countries don't use it at all, but we're more likely to try to clarify if we're talking about you singular or you plural by using ye for you plural. So ye is never used for singular you, it's always just used for plural you, and we do it quite often. So for example, if I would like to speak more formally, I would probably have to make a conscious effort to make sure that I use you for you plural if I am trying to be more formal. So it's really, really common for us to kind of communicate in a little bit more informal space, including using the word ye. It's difficult to say ye when it's not in a sentence. It sounds weird, but I use it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard use as well. So with an
That's
S
kind
at
of a
the end.
Dublin thing,
Yeah.
and not just Dublin, but I like it's kind of regional. So
Oh,
not all parts of the country would use, and not all parts of Dublin would use either. I think maybe there might be in County Cavan for I'm not really sure, but I know in some other counties they use it. And something else that's regional for my county that I'm from is with Tipperary is that we say well a lot. So instead of saying hello or hi, very often in Tipperary people would greet each other, well, how are you? Instead of saying hello, how are you? And
okay.
people in Ireland laugh at people from Tipperary because we say well for a greeting. So
Interesting.
yeah. So, there can be regional things like that as well, of course.
Yeah, it's funny, and I think for people based in other counties, they might pick up those things and not realize they're regional things that
Yes,
they're
that
learning.
definitely happens. You're absolutely right. And another thing that happens quite a lot, and this is a word of warning, and probably I should add this to the presentation as well because it's very important, I feel, is that in Ireland, it's more acceptable than in some other English speaking countries to use bad language, like you know,
Sure.
there's a lot of four-letter words that are bad language. So it's very, very common for people to use what would be considered bad language, but it's kind of normalized in everyday situations in Ireland, including in the workplace. Like not in every workplace, and it might depend on the industry, the sector. It will depend on who you're speaking to in the workplace, everything like that. But generally, it's much more normalized in Ireland to use bad language than it is in the UK or the US. And sometimes when people, from out, they come to Ireland and they learn English here, and they pick up, the how normal it is to use that bad language, and but they might not really recognize when it's not okay to use it, because it feels
Yeah.
like maybe to them that it's really okay to use it almost anytime because they hear it so much. But be really, really careful that if you are exposed to a lot of the F word and other bad language words, that you're careful about, when you use that. So even
Yeah.
though you might hear it a lot, it doesn't mean it's okay in almost every situation. So be careful with that.
Yes, I've came across that
Yeah.
before, and it is, I think, a bit of an issue. If you learn the language when you're in the country, especially, you
Yeah.
pick that up as, part of your vocabulary, and you think it's
Yes.
always normal. And then I heard it in a job interview, and everyone's
Yes.
a bit
That's
shocked.
not okay. Yeah,
And yeah, there
exactly.
was an
Yeah.
understanding of the cultural differences and
Yes.
all of that, so that was
Yeah.
fine, and there wasn't an issue
Yeah.
in that particular case. But in most cases, it will be an issue. So it's just something
Yeah.
to keep aware of.
Exactly, yeah. Some people, like let's say in that interview context, it's fine if the interviewers have some awareness that, this is just because they picked it up, so to
Yeah,
speak, and whereas you can't really depend on everybody knowing that or having that awareness. So just be careful about using bad language in different contexts.
brilliant. All right. If there are no more questions, I think we're just running a bit of out of time. So thank you so much, Bridget. That was
Lovely.
great. I don't know if you can see the chat, but we got some lovely messages there saying it was really, really
Oh,
useful.
lovely.
So
Great.
thank you so much. And if there are any other questions in the next few days, feel free to send me a message and I can send that on to Bridget as well.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, so thank you so much. And
I'll
thanks
send a
everyone
little
for joining.
handout to Lita so that you can
Brilliant.
share it with everybody as well. And thank you everybody for joining the session. And I hope you really did get something from it. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bridget. And thanks
Have a lovely
everyone.
day.
You
Thank
too.
you. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.
Bye
Thanks.
Bye.
bye.
Bye.